The night was colder than usual, and the streets were almost empty. A young man walked slowly toward the bus stop after finishing his long shift. His legs felt heavy, and his old shoes made a soft squeak with each step on the wet pavement. The air carried a sharp chill that bit into his skin, but he was used to it. For him, cold nights and long hours were nothing new. Life had taught him how to survive with little, and he carried that lesson in silence. When he reached the bus stop, he noticed he wasn't alone. A woman sat on the bench, her shoulders hunched, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She was trembling, and it was clear she didn't have the right clothes for a night like this. The man paused for a moment, unsure if he should say anything. She looked lost in her own world, her eyes staring down at the ground as though she didn't want to be noticed. He took a seat at the far end of the bench, giving her space. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind rushing past and the occasional passing car. After a while, he glanced at her again. The way she shivered made him feel uneasy. Her thin jacket looked more like something meant for autumn, not the freezing winter night. The young man looked down at his own coat. It wasn't new, and it wasn't fancy. It was old, a little torn at the sleeve, but it was warm enough to keep him from shaking in the cold. He thought about the hours he had worked to buy it and how much he needed it. But then he thought about how much more she needed it right now. Something inside him told him he couldn't just sit there and watch her freeze. He cleared his throat softly, trying not to startle her. "Excuse me," he said in a low voice. "You look really cold. Do you want to use my coat?" The woman raised her head slightly, surprised by his words. Her eyes widened for a moment, as if she couldn't believe someone would offer such a thing. She hesitated, as though she wanted to refuse out of pride, but her trembling gave her away. I couldn't," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The young man gave a small smile. "It's okay. I'll be fine. Please, take it." Without waiting for her to argue, he slipped off his coat and gently placed it around her shoulders. The moment the fabric touched her, she gripped it tightly, pulling it close as if she had just been handed warmth and safety. She looked at him again, this time with eyes that held both gratitude and surprise. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged lightly, as if it was nothing at all. "Don't mention it." Anyone would have done the same. But in his heart, he knew that wasn't true. He had seen how people often walked past others without a second glance, too busy with their own lives to notice who needed help. He didn't expect anything back. He just couldn't let someone sit there and suffer when he had the power to make it a little easier. The woman sat quietly for a while, wrapped in the coat. She felt its warmth and felt something else too, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine kindness with no strings attached. She glanced at the young man, trying to study him. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from work, and his tired eyes told the story of someone who had faced struggles of his own. Yet, despite all of that, he chose to give away the one thing that was protecting him from the cold. The bus finally came into sight, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The man stood up, brushing the dust from his pants. He gave her one last nod before stepping onto the bus. She wanted to say more, maybe even return the coat right there, but something in her heart told her to hold on to it. She clutched it tighter as the bus pulled away, leaving her on the bench with her thoughts swirling as the vehicle disappeared down the road. The woman remained seated, the coat still draped around her shoulders. She wasn't just warm now, she was shaken in a way she hadn't expected. For someone like her, used to seeing people chase after wealth, power, and recognition, this small act of kindness stood out like a light in the dark. She whispered to herself, almost as if making a promise, "I won't forget this." The man, meanwhile, sat quietly on the bus, his arms crossed against the cold that pressed in without his coat. He leaned his head against the window, watching the blurry lights of the city pass by. He didn't think twice about what he had done. For him, it was simple. If you can help someone, you should. He had no idea that the woman he left behind was far from ordinary. He had no idea that she was living a life so different from his. A life filled with wealth and power. He couldn't have known that his small act of kindness had just planted a seed that would soon grow into something far bigger than he could imagine. Asterisk. The next morning came quietly. The young man woke up in his small rented room, the sunlight peeking weakly through the thin curtains. The place was simple, just a mattress, a small table, and a chair. He rubbed his hands together, still feeling the leftover cold from the night before. Without his coat, the walk home had been rough, but he didn't regret it. He never did when it came to helping someone. To him, kindness wasn't something you measured. It was something you gave, even if it cost you a little comfort. He got ready for the day, put on his work clothes, and stepped out. Life went on as usual, work, bills, and the daily routine that didn't leave much space for surprises. He didn't think much about the woman at the bus stop. To him, she had been just another stranger, someone who needed help in a moment, and that was all. He had no idea she had gone home with his coat still wrapped around her, holding onto it like it was more than just fabric. Far away, in a tall glass building that touched the sky, the same woman stood in front of her large window, looking out at the busy city. The skyline was beautiful, filled with shining towers and endless traffic. Behind her, assistants moved quickly, carrying files and answering calls. She was used to this world: boardrooms, decisions worth millions, people who bowed their heads when she walked past. To everyone else, she was a powerful CEO, someone untouchable, someone who didn't know what it meant to live simply. But that night at the bus stop had shaken her. She had gone out alone, wanting to experience the city without bodyguards, without the constant bubble of wealth. She hadn't expected the cold to bite so hard, and she hadn't expected anyone to notice her trembling. Yet a young man, dressed in worn clothes and tired from work, had seen her suffering and given her the only coat he had. No one in her world had ever done something like that without expecting something in return. She touched the coat again, which she had placed neatly on her sofa. It still carried the faint smell of old fabric, maybe a hint of soap, and something real. It was a simple coat, not worth much, but it felt more valuable than anything she owned. She couldn't shake the thought. Who was he? Why would he help a stranger when he himself clearly didn't have much? The more she thought about it, the more she felt she couldn't just let it go. She wanted to see him again, not because she owed him, but because something about his quiet kindness had touched her heart in a way money never could. Find the young man from last night, she finally told her assistant. Her assistant blinked, confused. The one at the bus stop? How would we use the bus company's security footage? She said firmly. There are cameras everywhere. Check the route, check the time, and trace him. I need to know who he is. The assistant hesitated for a moment, but knew better than to argue. Orders from her were never to be questioned. Within hours, her team was already working. They tracked the bus, pulled the footage, and followed the trail. Slowly, piece by piece, they discovered his identity, a young man working long shifts, living in a modest neighborhood, far removed from the glittering towers of her world. She read through the information quietly, her lips pressed together. Everything about him spoke of struggle, low wages, hard work, and survival. Yet, in spite of all that, he had given his only coat to her without hesitation. The more she learned, the stronger her decision became. She wasn't just going to return the coat. She wanted to do something more. Meanwhile, the man was at work, completely unaware of what was happening. He carried heavy boxes, cleaned up floors, and greeted customers politely. His life went on as normal, with no idea that someone powerful was searching for him. To him, yesterday's moment at the bus stop was already fading into memory, but the woman had already made up her mind. She wasn't the type to forget, and she wasn't the type to let kindness go unanswered. She told herself, This man gave me warmth without asking for anything. It's my turn to give him something he never dreamed possible. As the day ended and the city lights came alive, she sat in her office, the coat still beside her. She could almost hear his voice again, soft and humble, telling her not to worry, that he would be fine. She knew then that tomorrow she would go to him herself. Not as a CEO, not as a woman of wealth and power, but as someone who had been touched by his simple, selfless act. The young man had no idea that his life, which had always followed the same routine, was about to take a turn he never saw coming. The following evening was quiet, just like most nights in his life. After another long day of work, the young man walked back to his small apartment, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. The building was old, the walls cracked, and the hallway lights flickered, but to him, it was home. He placed his bag down and sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his hands together to fight off the chill. Without his coat, the nights had been harder, but he didn't complain. He had food for the evening, a roof over his head, and tomorrow's work to look forward to. That was enough. He was just about to heat a simple meal when he heard a knock on the door. It startled him. No one usually visited. Most of his neighbors kept to themselves, and he didn't have family nearby. For a moment, he thought it might be a mistake. The knock came again, louder this time, firm but not harsh. He walked to the door and opened it slowly. What he saw left him speechless. Standing in the dim light of the hallway was the woman from the bus stop. But she didn't look the same. She wasn't the shivering stranger in thin clothes anymore. Tonight she stood tall, dressed in a sleek black suit, her hair perfectly styled, her presence commanding. Behind her, two people in professional attire stood silently, holding folders. Even in the modest hallway of his old building, she carried an aura that didn't belong there. The man blinked, his mind racing. It's you, he stammered, surprised to see her again. She smiled softly, her eyes warmer than he expected. Yes, may I come in? Still confused, he stepped aside, and she entered. The room was small, almost too small for her presence, but she didn't seem bothered. She looked around quietly, taking in the simplicity of his life, the cracked walls, the worn furniture, the tiny stove in the corner. She turned back to him and gently held out the coat. This belongs to you. I wanted to return it in person. He reached for it, but before he could speak, she added, I also wanted to tell you who I really am. He frowned slightly, unsure what she meant. She took a deep breath, as if deciding how much to reveal. The night we met, you didn't know me. You didn't ask who I was or what I had. You simply gave. That's rare. What you don't know is, I'm not just an ordinary woman. I'm the CEO of one of the largest companies in this city. Her words hung in the air like a weight. The young man's eyes widened, and for a moment he thought she might be joking. He let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. A CEO? You're serious? She nodded calmly. Yes, I live in a world where people only show kindness when they want something back. But that night, you gave me the only coat you had, without hesitation. You didn't know me. You didn't expect anything, and yet you helped. Do you know how rare that is in my world? The young man felt his chest tighten. He didn't know how to respond. He had never stood in front of someone so powerful, someone whose decisions could move millions. And yet here she was, standing in his tiny apartment, speaking to him as if he mattered. I don't understand, he admitted quietly. Why would someone like you come here? Why would you bother with me? She stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. Because kindness matters. Because people like you remind me what's real. I couldn't just forget what you did. I had to see you again. I had to tell you that your small act has left a mark on me. He lowered his gaze, unsure what to say. To him, it was simple. Someone was cold, and he had warmth to give. He didn't think it was something that deserved attention, much less a visit from a billionaire. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "I didn't do it expecting anything back." "I know," she replied, her voice firm but gentle. "And that's exactly why it matters. People like you are the reason I still believe in humanity, even when I'm surrounded by greed and ambition." For a moment, silence filled the room. The man felt torn between disbelief and gratitude, unsure if this was really happening. It felt unreal, like a dream he would soon wake from. Yet the coat in her hands and the sincerity in her eyes told him it was real. Finally, she placed the coat on his chair and smiled. "I'll come back tomorrow. There's more I want to talk to you about. More I want to offer. But for now, I just wanted you to know who I am and that I won't forget what you did." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, her assistants following silently. The young man stood frozen, watching her leave, the sound of her heels echoing in the hallway until the door closed behind her. He sat down slowly, his mind spinning. A CEO in his apartment? It didn't make sense. He looked at the coat she had returned and picked it up, holding it close. It no longer felt like just a coat. It felt like the beginning of something much larger, something he couldn't quite see yet. That night, as he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't sleep. His life had always been ordinary, but now it felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. Something told him this was only the start. The next day moved slowly for the young man. At work, his body carried out the tasks as usual, lifting boxes, greeting customers, sweeping floors, but his mind kept replaying the moment from last night. He could still see her standing in his small room, dressed like someone from another world, telling him she was a CEO. It didn't feel real. It didn't match the life he knew. Every time he tried to convince himself it had been some strange dream. He remembered the weight of his coat when she placed it on his chair. He remembered the look in her eyes, steady and sincere, as she spoke about kindness. He had never met anyone like her before, and he had no idea why someone like her wanted to see him again. That evening, when he returned home, he found her waiting. This time she wasn't alone. A black car had pulled up outside his building, its polished body shining under the streetlight. She stepped out gracefully, her assistants trailing behind. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering at the sight. Cars like that didn't belong in this part of town. The woman gave him a warm smile. "I told you I would return," she said. He nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. "Yes, but I didn't think you meant so soon." "I don't like waiting," she replied simply, her tone calm but firm. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." Confused but curious, he followed her into the car. The leather seats, the quiet hum of the engine, the way the city lights blurred as they sped past, it was all new to him. He sat stiffly, unsure if he even belonged in such a place. She noticed his unease and spoke gently. "You don't need to be nervous. You're here because you deserve to be." The car stopped in front of a towering building, glass and steel reaching high into the night sky. He tilted his head back, staring at it in awe. He had passed by this place before, never imagining he would one day walk inside. The guards at the entrance opened the doors respectfully as she let him in. The lobby was breathtaking: marble floors, sparkling lights, a giant chandelier hanging above. People in suits moved briskly, nodding respectfully when they saw her. To them, she was their leader, the woman whose decisions shaped their future. To him, she was still the stranger who had once shivered at a bus stop. She guided him into an elevator, pressing the top floor. When the doors opened, he stepped into a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the entire city. The view was unlike anything he had ever seen. For a moment, he forgot his worries and just stared, the lights of the city glittering like stars below. "This is my world," she said quietly, walking toward her desk. "The world where I make decisions every day, where people only approach me because they want something: money, power, connections. But last night, you didn't ask for anything. You gave instead. That is why you're here." He looked at her, his voice low. "I still don't understand. Why me?" She smiled softly, as if she expected that question. "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. You reminded me of humanity. And I want to give you something in return." She gestured for him to sit across from her. Papers were spread on the desk, contracts and documents that looked too complicated for him to read. She pushed them aside, focusing only on him. "Tell me," she asked, "what is it you dream of? What would you do if life gave you a real chance?" He froze, caught off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. He had spent his life thinking about survival, rent, bills, food. Dreams felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. He looked down, fumbling for words. I don't know," he admitted. "I just worked to get by. I never thought about more than that." She leaned forward, her tone firm but encouraging. "Then start thinking now. Because I'm offering you something most people only dream about. A job, an opportunity. A path out of the life you're trapped in. Not charity, not pity, but a chance to prove yourself." His eyes widened. "A job? Here? In your company?" "Yes," she said simply. "You've already proven you have something most people here lack: kindness, humility, integrity. Those qualities matter more than any degree or polished resume. I want people like you in my world. People who remind me why we do what we do." He sat back, overwhelmed. His heart raced. A part of him wanted to accept right away, to escape the endless cycle of low-paying work and sleepless nights. But another part of him hesitated. Could he really belong here? Could someone like him walk into this gleaming building every day and stand among people who lived lives so different from his? Sensing his doubt, she spoke gently. "I know this is a lot to take in. But remember last night, you gave without hesitation. You didn't think twice. That same courage will guide you here. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing." Her words lingered in the air, heavy but hopeful. He lowered his gaze, his hands clenched together. Slowly, he nodded. "If you really think I can do it, then I'll try." Her smile widened, genuine and full of pride. "Good, then it's decided. This is only the beginning for you." As he sat there, the weight of her offer sank in. For the first time in his life, he felt a door opening, one he never even knew existed. A door to a world he had only seen from the outside, a world where his life might finally change. That night, as he left the building with her promise echoing in his mind, he realized something important. His act of kindness had been small, almost forgettable to him. But to her, it had been everything. And now, it was changing the course of his life forever. Asterisk, the days that followed felt like a dream the young man could not wake from. For the first time in his life, he walked into an office building not as a visitor, not as a janitor, but as someone with a place there. At first, he felt like an outsider. His old clothes looked out of place among polished shoes and expensive suits. His hands, rough from years of hard labor, looked nothing like the hands that typed effortlessly on keyboards around him. But the woman had kept her promise. She introduced him not as a charity case, but as someone special. "This is a man who showed me real kindness," she told her team. "And I believe he can teach us more than any textbook." Her words gave him confidence he didn't know he had at first. He started with simple tasks, helping with records, learning how to use new systems, assisting others where he could. It wasn't easy. Some colleagues looked at him with curiosity, others with doubt. But he worked quietly, determined to prove that he belonged. Every small job he did, he gave his full effort, just as he always had. Slowly, people began to notice that his humility and dedication set him apart. The woman checked in on him often, not as a distant boss, but as someone who truly cared. She asked if he was adjusting, if he needed guidance, and reminded him that the same kindness he had shown her, should now be shown to himself. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Not as a worker lost in the crowd, but as a person who mattered. Months passed, and his life began to change. His pay was better, his living conditions improved, and he finally had enough to save instead of just surviving from week to week. He bought himself a new coat, nothing fancy, but warm enough to remind him of the night when everything had begun. He even started helping others more intentionally, remembering how one simple act had turned his life around. If he saw someone struggling with groceries, he rushed to help. If a stranger at the bus stop looked cold, he offered what little he could. The woman watched quietly as he grew into his new life. She admired how he never let success change his heart. Many people who entered her world became greedy, chasing power and forgetting humility. But he stayed the same, grounded, thankful, and kind. That, to her, was his greatest strength. One evening, she invited him to a company dinner. It was held in a grand hall, filled with chandeliers, music, and laughter. Important guests gathered, people who ran industries, people who could buy and sell entire companies with a single decision. The young man sat among them, nervous at first, but she placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You belong here. Don't forget that." When she raised a glass to speak, she looked directly at him. "Months ago, I met someone who gave away his only coat on a freezing night. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't care about status or wealth. He only cared that I was shivering. That act changed my life, and it reminded me of what truly matters. Tonight, I want everyone here to remember success is not measured only by profits, but by how we treat people when no one is watching." The hall filled with applause, but the young man sat silently, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never imagined his small gesture would echo in such a place, among such people. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like himself, just a man who couldn't bear to see someone suffer in the cold. Later that night, as the event ended and the guests left, he stood by the window of the grand hall, looking out at the city lights. The woman joined him, her expression soft. "You've come a long way," she said. He nodded quietly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. All of this. Just because of a coat." She smiled. "Not because of a coat. Because of you. Because you chose kindness when you didn't have to. That's what opened the door. That's what changed everything." He looked at her, and for the first time, he truly believed her. His life wasn't just better, it was transformed. And yet, deep inside, he knew he would never stop being the same person who once sat at that bus stop. Because kindness wasn't something you put on or take off like clothing. It was who you were. As they stood there, side by side, the city alive beneath them. One truth settled in his heart. Sometimes, the smallest act, done in silence and without expectation, can ripple farther than you ever imagine. And in that moment, he understood the lesson his own life had taught him, that no act of kindness is ever wasted.